Welcome to the Deep Dive, powered by TalkTickers.
Hey there.
We cut through the noise of earnings calls to bring you the essentials.
That's the plan.
Today, we're diving into the first quarter 2025 call from a company focused on some really innovative enzyme therapies.
Yeah, for severe burns and chronic wounds. Pretty interesting stuff.
Our mission here is simple. Extract the key figures, the clinical updates, the forward-looking bits.
All based only on what management actually shared on the call.
Right. Give you a clear picture of where they stand and where they think they're headed.
Exactly. Think of us as your guides through the transcript. We pull out the nuggets that matter.
Okay, let's jump right in. Q1 2025 financials. What's the headline?
Well, total revenue was $4 million.
Okay, $4 million. How does that compare?
It's actually down. Was $5 million in Q1 last year?
Ah, okay. Any reason given for the drop?
Yeah, they pointed to lower revenue from Barta-funded development services. Said some of those programs are sort of winding down, nearing completion.
Got it. So less government development money coming in as projects finish up. What about profit?
Okay, so this is interesting. Despite the lower revenue, gross profit actually went up slightly. $0.7 million compared to $0.6 million last year.
Really? How does that work?
Better gross margin. It was 19% this quarter, up from 12% a year ago. They said it was down to a favorable revenue mix. Basically, the revenue they did get was more profitable.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, where are they spending their money? R&D.
Big increase there. R&D expenses jumped to $2.9 million. That's up from $1.5 million.
Wow, almost double. What's driving that?
They were clear. It's investment in the Eskerax Phase 3 trial. That's the chronic wound one and, related activities. Really pushing that forward.
And SG&A, sales general admin costs.
Slight increase there. $3.1 million this quarter versus $2.9 million last year. Not a huge jump.
So if you put that together, more R&D spending, slightly higher SG&A, lower revenue, the operating loss must have widened.
It did. Operating loss came in at $5.2 million for the quarter. Compare that to $3.7 million in Q1 2024. So yeah, wider loss from core operations.
Okay, wider operating loss.
Yeah.
But I saw the net loss figure look quite different.
That's the twist. Net loss actually improved. A lot. It was only $0.7 million, or $0.07 per share. Compared to a net loss of $9.7 million, or 0.15 cents per share in Q1 2024. Big swing.
Hold on. Operating loss gets worse, net loss gets way better. How?
Yeah.
That seems counterintuitive.
Right. It comes down to something below the operating line. They mentioned non-cash financial income from warrant revaluation.
Ah, the warrants. Explain that again quickly.
Sure. They have warrants out there from past financing deals. Accounting rules mean they have to revalue these warrants each quarter based on the share price. It's non-cash, just an accounting entry.
So depending on share price movement, it can be income or an expense on the net income line.
Exactly. This quarter, the movement resulted in financial income, which significantly offset that wider operating loss on paper. Didn't involve actual cash, though.
Got it. So the operating loss shows the core investment trend, while the net loss had this big accounting item helping it out. Makes sense. What about cash? How much did they burn?
They ended Q1 with $38.7 million in cash, equivalents, and deposits.
And that's down from
$43.6 million at the end of 2024. So they used about $5.1 million to fund operations during the quarter.
Which includes that higher R&D spend.
Pretty much in line with funding these big trials and operations, according to them.
Okay, so that's the financial picture.
Hey.
Investment focus, Barta dip, warrant noise. Let's pivot to the pipeline. Eskerax first.
Yeah, Eskerax. That's their next-gen enzymatic debrider for chronic wounds. Big focus on venous leg ulcers, VLUs.
Right, the value study. That's the big phase 3. How's that going?
They said progress is right on track, recruitment moving as planned.
Remind me of the scale.
It's a global trial aiming for 216 patients across roughly 40 sites, U.S. and Europe.
And site activation.
Most U.S. sites are up and running, enrolling patients. They expect the majority of the European sites to get activated in Q3 this year, so soon.
And they seem confident about this one.
Very. They kept talking about how it's strategically de-risked because the phase 2 results were so strong, basically saying if they just replicate phase 2, that's a win.
Has they changed anything for phase 3?
Yeah, a few enhancements, larger patient number for better statistical power, and they've built in an interim analysis.
Oh, when's that?
Planned for when they hit 65% enrollment, which they estimate will be around mid-2026.
And the purpose of that?
Allows them to look at the data partway through and potentially make adaptive adjustments to the trial design if needed. Smart move. Also, standardized treatment protocols across all sites.
Good for consistency.
Definitely helps reduce variability. They also made a point that Eskerax uses the same active ingredient, the API, as Nexobrid.
The approved burn drug.
Right. Same FDA-approved API. Nearly identical job removing dead tissue, Escher. They see that as a plus from a regulatory standpoint.
Makes sense. Now, I remember something about another Eskerax study. A head-to-head.
Yes, exactly. To beef up the BLA submission and get ready for commercial launch, they're planning a smaller Phase 2 study.
Details.
About 45 patients, randomized, prospective. It'll compare Eskerax directly against collagenase.
Which is the main competitor.
Yeah, Santyl in the U.S. and the equivalent product in Europe. This study is slated to start in the second half of 2025.
And the goal here is?
Generate that critical comparative data. Super important for talking to payers, market access, and figuring out pricing.
Right. And is this one quicker?
Should be. They said it's shorter, simpler than the big Phase 3, and they expect it to finish before the Phase 3 results are out. So useful data coming sooner.
They also mentioned collaborations.
Yeah, they seemed quite pleased about this. Said they're now working with almost all the leading global wound care companies on different parts of their clinical programs.
Like who? Did they name names?
They mentioned Kerasis specifically, saying they'll be supporting the upcoming diabetic foot ulcer, or DFU, trial. They see this broad collaboration as strong external validation.
And are they claiming advantages over the current standards, Santyl?
Definitely. They pointed to a recent peer-reviewed publication, a post-hoc analysis of their Phase 2 VLU data.
And it showed.
According to them, superiority across multiple endpoints. Faster debridement, better granulation tissue formation, that's the healthy new tissue growth, and improved wound closure. Pretty clear claims.
Okay, what about the diabetic foot ulcer program itself? You mentioned Kerasis supporting it.
Yeah, momentum there too. They secured the grant part $2.5 million from the European Innovation Council Accelerator funding.
Nice. What about the equity part of that funding?
Discussions are ongoing for a larger $13.75 million equity piece. They noted it might not happen, but crucially, they said that won't impact the DFU study timeline.
So the trial's still on track?
Yep, remains on track for a 2026 start. They just need to finalize the protocol with both the FDA and the EMA in Europe.
Did they share any actual DFU data from earlier studies?
They did, from their first Phase 2 in DFUs. Pretty striking numbers.
Like what?
Okay, so 58% got complete debridement with Eskerax versus only 14% with just the gel vehicle.
Big difference.
Huge. And 42% showed granulation tissue with Eskerax versus 11% with vehicle.
And speed, that's key in wound care.
Right. Median time to complete debridement, 23 days for Eskerax versus 128 days for the vehicle group.
Wow. Over 4 months versus just over 3 weeks.
Exactly. And median time to get the wound bed prepped for closure was 24 days with Eskerax, whereas the vehicle group never even achieved that median time during the study.
Okay, those are compelling numbers comparing it to just the vehicle gel. So the overall goal for Eskerax.
Stated ambition. If Phase 3 is positive, they want to become the global leader in enzymatic wound debridement, aiming high.
Very clear. Okay, let's switch to Nexobrid, the burn therapy. How's the U.S. launch going?
Continuing to expand. They said they have consistent ordering now from nearly 60 burn centers.
And sales numbers.
Their U.S. partner, Vericel, reported strong growth for Nexobrid in Q1, up 27% year over year and up 31% just from the previous quarter, Q4 2024. So good momentum.
What about outside the U.S.?
Still facing the same issue. Demand is outstripping their manufacturing capacity, especially noted in Japan and Europe.
Right, the capacity bottleneck. That's been a theme. What's the update on fixing that?
The new manufacturing facility commissioning is on track. They expect it to be operationally ready by the end of this year, 2025.
And when can they actually sell product made there?
Commercial availability is anticipated in 2026. That depends on getting the FDA and EMA approvals for the new facility, of course.
But this new plant should solve the supply issue.
That's the plan. They said it's expected to significantly expand production capabilities to finally meet that global demand.
Any other Nexobrid news? Clinical updates.
Yeah, results from a pediatric study were published, said it reinforced the efficacy and safety profile seen in adults, showing it works well for non-surgical Escher removal in kids too.
Okay, now there was some really impactful news about its use in a crisis situation.
Yes, this was quite striking. New data presented highlighted Nexobrid's use during the Israel-Hamas war.
For what kind of injuries?
Treating patients with blast injuries, complex burns, really tough cases.
Wow.
They shared this anecdote. One hospital reported treating a trauma or burn patient every minute for 24 hours straight during the peak. Really underscored NexoBrid's value in mass casualty events, emergencies.
And that real-world use is having ripple effects.
Absolutely. It's caught the attention of governments globally.
Including the U.S.
Yes, the U.S. government has apparently expressed interest in having a domestic backup manufacturing site for NexoBrid.
A second site in the U.S.
Potentially. The company started planning and site selection for it, supported by Barta. That initial planning project should wrap up by Q3 this year, giving more clarity on location, timing, costs, etc.
And this emergency use is also driving interest in stockpiling.
That's what they're seeing.
Oh.
Increased interest globally, US, Europe, other regions specifically following this experience.
Are these firm orders yet?
Sounds like discussions are starting. They expect some to turn into real opportunities, but likely after the new manufacturing capacity is online. That's the key constraint again.
Makes sense. Can't stockpile if you can't make enough.
Right. They did emphasize their priority is treating current patients, but they also noted potential stockpiling is kind of baked into their revenue guidance already.
Which was?
$24 million for 2024 and a range of $30 million to $33 million for 2025. So they're anticipating some level of this already.
Interesting. So that government interest, stockpiling, that could be a whole separate driver for NexoBrid beyond just hospital use.
Exactly. A potentially significant one tied directly to getting that new facility up and running.
Okay, let's try to connect these dots for the investor context. Pipeline moving, manufacturing expanding. How does this tie into their strategy?
Management's view is pretty clear. They see themselves executing well and positioning the company for long-term value.
Let's revisit that Barta funding dip in Q1.
Yeah.
They seem confident it's temporary.
Yeah, they reiterated the reasons. Programs ending, temporary admin transition delays in the U.S. They were reassuring, said programs are back on track.
And crucially, they didn't change their full-year guidance.
Nope. Still guiding to $24 million for 2024 from those sources, which suggests they expect that revenue line to pick back up in the coming quarters.
Okay. And what about that volatile financial income expense line, the warrant thing? Any more color on that?
Just reinforcing that it's non-cash, driven purely by the share price movement at the end of each quarter when they do the revaluation.
So Q1 saw income because of the price level then?
Yeah.
What about Q2?
They actually flagged this, said if the share price increase they saw after Q1 holds up through Q2, it would likely flip to a financial expense in the Q2 results. Same mechanism, opposite direction.
Good to know. It's just accounting noise, really. Did they mention when those warrants expire?
Yeah, $34 million worth, expiring in November 2026. Said they were currently way below the money, meaning the exercise price is much higher than the current share price. So this noise should go away after late 2026.
Got it. Okay, back to Eskerax. That head-to-head study against Santyl collagenase, how does that play into pricing?
Crucial piece. They talked about pricing from two angles. One is cost per application, arguing Eskerax works faster, needs fewer applications, so could justify a premium that way.
Okay, product cost, what's the other angle?
Health economics. This is the big one, potentially. Yeah. If Esker saves weeks of treatment time for chronic wounds, think about the downstream savings.
Fewer doctor visits, maybe fewer hospital stays, fewer infections.
Exactly. Big potential cost savings for the whole healthcare system and for patients. That's the value proposition they want to quantify.
Yeah, they're working on that.
Yep. Said their current internal models focus more on the product cost premium, but they've commissioned a full market research study specifically on this health economics impact. Results will feed into their market access and pricing strategy.
Makes sense. Now, that potential U.S. backup manufacturing site, is that purely for stockpiling?
Primarily framed that way, yes, driven by government interest.
Yeah.
But they did acknowledge it could potentially serve other purposes. Could add to overall capacity for commercial NexoBrid demand down the road. Maybe even help with future Eskerax manufacturing eventually. Adds flexibility.
Okay. One last check on Eskerax Phase 3. Enrollment pace? Are they happy with it?
Reiterated it's on track with their expectations. About half a patient per site per month.
Is that fast? Seems like a lot of potentially eligible patients out there.
Right. They mentioned maybe 1.5 million relevant VLU patients in the U.S. alone, but they stress they're using a really rigorous screening process to make sure they enroll the right patients, ones who perfectly fit the study criteria. They seem to be prioritizing the quality of the enrollment, the integrity of the trial data, over just filling it up super fast.
So strategic choice. Maybe slower enrollment. but higher confidence in the results if they hit the endpoints.
That seems to be the thinking. A trade-off to maximize the chances of a clear win that satisfies regulators and supports adoption later.
All right, let's move to the segment where we remind everyone.
Loud and clear.
This is absolutely not financial advice. What follows is purely illustrative.
Just connecting some dots from the call, exploring a hypothetical, not a recommendation.
Okay, disclaimer firmly in place. So, based only on what management discussed in this call, here's an outrageous but plausible trade idea to think about.
Let's hear it.
Consider a long position, maybe structured using long-dated call options that expire sometime after mid-2026. Why then?
Okay, timing is key. What happens around mid-2026 based on their commentary?
Two potential major catalysts could converge. First, that big new manufacturing facility is expected to be commercially operational in 2026.
All right, unlocking that pent-up global demand for NexoBrid, especially the stockpiling potential.
Yeah.
Revenue currently capped by supply, they suggested.
Exactly. So Catalyst 1, manufacturing bottleneck potential resolved, opening up new revenue streams for NexoBrid. Catalyst 2.
That would be the Eskerax Phase 3 interim analysis, right? Also expected mid-2026.
Bingo. If that data looks good, consistent with Phase 2 like they hope, that could be a massive de-risking event for their biggest pipeline asset. Could really change the narrative around Eskerax.
So the trade idea bets on both things happening around the same time. Operational success meets clinical validation.
Sort of. It's a bet on management executing on both fronts, roughly within the timeline they laid out. Solving the NexoBrid supply issue and getting positive interim data for Eskerax.
The potential upside being the combined impact significantly boosting revenue potential and overall company valuation.
Plausibly, yes, but the risks are obviously enormous.
Huge. Clinical trial failure is always possible. Manufacturing scale-up can hit delays or snags. Regulatory approvals for the facility or Eskerax could be delayed or denied. That stockpiling interest might not turn into actual large orders. Competition doesn't stand still.
Exactly. Tons of risks. But the idea is built on the timelines and potential inflection points management themselves highlighted in this specific call.
Okay, understood. But just one more time.
This is not financial advice. Seriously. It's a highly speculative scenario based purely on this one earnings call.
Do your own research, understand the risks, talk to a professional. This is just thinking out loud based on the transcript.
Absolutely. Okay, with that done, let's quickly recap the key takeaways from this deep dive.
Sounds good. Overall picture seems to be steady execution, according to management.
Right. Despite that temporary Barta dip, they see strong progress on Eskerax Phase 3 for VLUs. They've got that head-to-head planned DFU program moving.
And lots of external validation through those big wound care company collaborations.
For NexoBrid, strong U.S. adoption continues. Global demand is high, but supply constrained.
But the manufacturing expansion is on track for year-end readiness, aiming for 2026 commercial production to fix that.
And that unique emergency use angle driving government interest in stockpiling and maybe even a U.S. backup site that's a potential game changer long term.
Yeah, management's perspective is clearly that these investments, especially in manufacturing, position them well for near-term NexoBrid growth and the potential Eskerax launch down the line. They believe they're set up for long-term value.
Okay, so a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on after hearing all this.
Let's hear it.
How might those unique emergency use cases and the resulting government interest fundamentally change the long-term market for a product like NexoBrid compared to just relying on standard hospital sales?
That's a good question. It adds a whole different dimension.
Or, think about this. What are the hidden costs, or maybe the hidden benefits, of a clinical trial design like Eskerax Phase 3, where management explicitly says they're prioritizing finding the right patient over just enrolling as fast as possible?
Yeah, interesting strategic choices with trade-offs, lots to mull over.
Indeed. And that wraps up our deep dive into this company's Q1 2025 earnings call.
We hope unpacking it this way gave you some useful context and highlighted the key messages management wanted to get across.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.